We've challenged ourselves to think about our process a little bit differently, to overcome biases, to help organizations learn in like a very designerly way, I think, a very creative way, but in ways that help us to be more strategic. So the first one is we use a technique called Futurecasting, and this is something that's been happening. There's been versions of this happening for a really long time. I think the roots of it are in scenario planning, which came out of the Cold War, planning for nuclear disaster. But we've sort of brought it into our space where we think it's really valuable. And again, think about our change curve, right? Things are changing really, really fast right now. So back in the Cold War, or 30 years ago, when the change curve was more gentle, you might have had 5, 10, 15 years before some big change came along. Now, if this is true, that things are changing so quickly, you might have to think farther out to think about your current product or experience cycle in kind of a different way. And I think this is what we see. So if we feel like potentially the pain points that we're being hired or we're focused on solving today might be irrelevant in whatever time frame we're shooting for. That may be the product development cycle. If it's going to take us 3 years to get there and then another 3 years to adoption, that's 6 years. In that context, are things changing so fast? Well, if they are, we want to make sure we frame the problem in the right way so that we're solving the right problem for the future. And again, I think this is a problem, this is a challenge that's unique to our place in time. So we did this. Anybody see this movie? It's called Used Cars. Hysterical. Our client, multi-billion-dollar company, owns lots and lots of businesses, technology businesses, media businesses, financial businesses, et cetera, in the automotive ecosystem. They help people buy and sell and own their cars. They help OEMs, all the OEMs, dealers, peer-to-peer selling. You guys might have an idea of who this is, but their mission is to transform this space. Our target date was 5 to 10 years out. Now, there's been a lot in the news lately about the automotive space and the technology there, et cetera, right? When we got this one in, we were like 5 to 10 years out in automotive, there might be some things changing. What's a different way for us to tackle this problem? So we thought about Futurecasting, and it's just a way of setting the context, setting the frame for the work that we were going to do was going to be sort of tackling the right goals. So what this is, what Futurecasting really tries to do is it tries to create a framework for us to see beyond our biases. These guys at this company have got a media property that's been generating billions of dollars for us. It's hard, when you've got something like that going, you've got to maintain it day in and day out, it's hard to shift gears and start to think about something very different. And Futurecasting enables us to do it. It's a process, looks like this. Step number 1 is define the focus. Think about the competitive pressures or the changing context. Really try to create a lens and a provocation about where you want to shoot for. I've got a really good example for this. Step number 2, do research. Everybody does trend research. We all do comparative research. Sometimes it just goes in a deck. Sometimes we talk about it. Sometimes it's inspiration. Sometimes it just doesn't go anywhere. Same kind of research, but we're going to take it an extra level. We're going to take it an extra step, and then that's the next step, which is creating these worlds and these events around that. So these worlds, think about them. They should be provocational. They should be really differentiated from each other. I assume there's a lot of sci-fi fans out there. I'm definitely one of them. But think about Star Trek, right? That's a world. It's very utopian, right? If you were going to design a starship or a car for Star Trek, it would be very different than the car or spaceship that you would design for Star Wars, which is very dystopian, which is crumbling. Think about it that way. And what we want to do with ourselves and our clients is create these spaces, and those become the backdrop for us to then start to solve problems, and they should be pretty different. Finally, the last piece is once you've created this context, once people have ingested this and really had an opportunity to live in those spaces, let's then start solving problems. Let's not start solving them from where we are today and the biases that we have today and the way that we're seeing the world today. Let's put it out there. The idea here, though, I have to say, is not about predicting the future. It's about taking on an adaptable mindset and making a space where you can make some intelligent bets. So the focus, pretty crisp, right? We're in this space where for 100 years, cars have been the profit concentrator for the automobile industry. Automobile industry, it's so big people don't know how big it is, but it's like I've heard 5, 6, 7 to $10 trillion business. I don't know if there's a bigger business. $10 trillion, right? So all of that is geared to making these vehicles that then people buy, and they go through a whole ecosystem to do that. But when you and I buy our car, that funds the whole system. The trick with cars, though, and this is really interesting, this is a stat that came out of this, is passenger vehicles are only used 4% of the time. Only 4% of the time. Are there any other industries out there that have utilization that's that low? This is a prime target for technology disruption. So we think the things that'll do it, potentially services and platforms. So let's talk about an example real quick. Smart car, I love this thing, it's so awesome. Little car made by Daimler, released in Europe, now it's kind of all around the world, but it's designed for the problems of today, for urban centers, pollution, fuel efficiency, et cetera. It's a great product. Daimler also makes these because it helps them game the system on their carbon requirements. So they can make big cars that suck up a lot of gas, because then they also make these that suck up a little bit of gas. So there's a lot of angles on this. What Daimler also did is they made a service called Cars to Go. It's a car sharing service, kind of like most car sharing services that we have. When they got to 1 million members, they put this out, and I thought that was super cool. And there's lots of fun little stories here. I think what's nice about these two examples, though, is you have your car it's a profit concentrator, right? And then you have a service or a platform that does something different, and it gives us a real crisp one-to-one. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So Smart Car took them 18 years to get to 1 million cars. Not too bad in the car world. I don't know if there are any car people out there, but not too bad. Cars to Go in 6 years got to 1 million customers. Faster, right? Pretty nice. The other thing is Cars to Go experienced 100% year-over-year growth, and every year they are bringing in half the MSRP of the vehicle. So there's a big monetary thing. But the thing that really has people freaked out is this. 1 million people serviced by 12,000 cars. You have 1 million cars on one side, you have 12,000 cars on the other side, and same number of customers. So that's got people freaked out. If this gets to scale, $10 trillion, business goes all kinds of sideways. So this is a backdrop that we gave our clients that their entire business is based on selling or facilitating the selling of a volume of vehicles, right? Think about how scary that is for these guys. You don't want to deal with something like that. So I think what we did with Futurecasting is trying to create a safe space where they can start to think about the future of their business, and it's kind of a little bit scary, but in a non-scary way. So what we did, there's a lot of different research methodologies for this. The one that we did is we call STEEP. So STEEP is social, technological, economical, environmental, and political. So before we were talking about sort of macroeconomic issues and how that kind of comes into our realm. This context, by looking kind of broadly at this, considering problem sets from all these angles, is super helpful. So think about your trend research, not just like kind of what Apple and Android are doing, but kind of like what are the regulations around what Apple is doing, et cetera, things like that. So then we take those and we kind of define the driving forces and future states. So we create a lot of these, and this is super duper fun. We take those trends and we will see something like a stat that says, when autonomous driving is fully realized, it will be so much safer. It's going to put the insurance business out of business because there just won't be collisions. A little bit in the future, but kind of conceivable. We imagine a time, though, but what we're also seeing is that legislation for autonomous driving, people talk about that as being a real blocker. So we create these things. They're fake news articles set in a future context. And this one, imagine a PSA, right? Like we've got Mothers Against Drunk Driving. We've got anti-smoking campaigns. Imagine Mothers Against, what did I call this, human driving? Yeah. Imagine that kind of grassroots pressure being applied to drive change. It's not inconceivable. Through a creative act like this, we start to work through our clients that are like, it's never going to happen. The franchise laws in all of the states across the country are too powerful to allow something like this to happen. You start to bring provocations in through this, and then it changes things a little bit. So what we do is we create a lot of these. We work with our clients to go through them, and we say, do you guys think this is likely? Do you think it's unlikely? We really spend a lot of time going through these and embracing them. A little bit of the anatomy on them is you got to have a punchy title. There's a signature paragraph. We talk about whether it's unlikely, and we give it a target date, right? The next thing we do is we create these worlds. And these are less provocative than other ones I've made in the future. It's a world of sharing, an internet of everything. It's converging retail. And then, how much longer? 10? 15. Okay, great. I'll move a little bit faster. So we create those. We get together in a workshop, right? Very immersive, a lot going on. We set up a room this way. We have big posters. We have everything, different tables for people to go through. And then what we do is we start with today, and we draw paths to the future, and we start to drop these events on them. It's a process that we go through that the folks then start to ingest all of these things, all of these events, and getting into the worlds. Then what we do is we do sets of worksheets to help us ideate in them. And these aren't really super different than many of the worksheets that we do either for UI or for product, et cetera. We've just set a different context for the space that we're designing for.